Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you tonight. My name is Steve Critchlow. I'm married with 5 daughters and now 4 granddaughters and 1 grandson. So the male line is not extinct in the Critchlow household just yet, so that's nice. I'm now actually retired from clinical practice. I retired about a year ago. I spent a lot of years in psychiatry of the elderly, but also quite a long time also in psychiatry of the adult population. One of my jobs when I was psychiatrist for the elderly was to go around to people's homes and to do assessments of their memory. If you want me to do that afterwards, I'll do it for you if you like. But anyway, I went to the home of this lady, and she was quite elderly. But really, there was absolutely nothing wrong with her memory. But I asked her the usual questions. I said, you know, what is your address, and what is your house number, and what town is this, and what year is it, and what day is it, and what date is it, what month is it, and a few other bits and pieces, like, you know, maybe asked her about the dates of certain important events and whatever. And she was absolutely spot on. Nothing wrong with her memory at all. Got back to the hospital, and one of the members of staff called me over and said, "Did you go and see my mother today?" And we talked about, well, yes, I did. Yes, she said. She thought the doctor had come, but she wasn't sure, because he didn't seem to know anything at all. Anxiety can affect your memory, and we'll come on to that maybe in the course of the talk. But it's lovely to come here. I have never been to Nina before. I feel very welcome, and I'm delighted that you've come along. We're just going to talk a little bit about coping with stress and anxiety, and I want just to say that, a little disclaimer, I'm not here to cure you, all right? If you think I'm going to cure you tonight, sorry, that's not my job. My job is to give you the best information I can around the subject and allow you then to use that yourselves in whatever way you will. But on the other hand, I will have some helpful things to say and some practical things that will be hopefully useful to you. Stress, of course, is something that we all face. If we're not facing stress, we're probably dead, okay? Because every one of us faces stress in our lives, and every one of us has slightly different capacity to deal with it. There are many people who can deal with stress very, very well without a problem, the many things that are happening. Other people will become stressed, anxious, etc. Imagine you're in a field with a raging bull. You've got a choice. If you're one of these people who's a fledgling matador, out comes your cape and your sword, you're not going to get that bull. On the other hand, most of us faced with that situation would probably run faster than we've ever run before, jump higher than we've ever jumped before to get out of that field quickly, okay? And that is called the fight or flight reaction. And in the body, there's a tremendous outpouring of something called adrenaline. And that adrenaline is what drives that reaction. The problem, of course, is if you are very anxious or very stressed, then actually the body is putting out that adrenaline all the time. And the problem with that is that you can become very exhausted because of anxiety and stress. And I've had many people come into the clinic and saying, I'm exhausted all the time. And of course that can have many different causes, but one of the causes is chronic severe anxiety and stress that is what can happen in some people's lives. The other thing that is commonly not really fully understood is the interaction. Don't worry, I'm not going to blind you with science tonight. It's fairly straightforward, but this is the only graph I will show you. But it's a graph between your quality of performance, how well you're doing, and your level of arousal, or how highly aroused you are, how stressed you are, you see? Now, if you are very low level of arousal and you're not being asked to do very much, you're probably asleep. And if you go to sleep tonight, I shall notice and I shall shout louder and ask you a difficult question, all right? Just so be prepared, all right? On the other hand, if you're watching a rather boring television program, well, your quality performance, you're not being asked to do very much, your level of arousal is a bit higher. Here maybe you're on your way to work. You know, you're kind of thinking about the day ahead, you're mildly alert, you're getting yourself together for the day, and your level of arousal is relatively high. Here is your kind of optimal level, all right, where you're performing well at your best, and your level of arousal is considerable, okay? Now, I hope that I shall be there tonight. However, if you ask me a very difficult question, what will happen is I will flip and I will go to here and feel stressed, you see. So you have to be kind with your questions afterwards. And if you're there, you notice that you're more aroused, but actually the quality of your performance has fallen off. And when you get very anxious, many people notice this, when you're feeling very anxious, you don't do things as well. Your quality of performance has gone down. And when you're in a flat panic, then actually, you know, you're not performing well at all because you're so agitated. And some people are over this area. And what we want to talk about tonight is, well, are there any ways of moving back to this kind of area? What is anxiety? Well, anxiety has lots of different definitions, but the feeling of fear that we get when faced with threatening or difficult situations. And those who tend to be anxious a lot of the time find that they often have a battle with other behaviors. For example, heavy alcohol intake is often a feature. You see, people with mental health problems will often drink to try and deal with their problems. It's a very common way of behaving. The difficulty with that is that there are several problems, but three key problems of alcohol being used to deal with mental health conditions is, of course, first of all, you're more likely to get addicted to the alcohol because you're using it to cover up something. Secondly, most people don't realize that alcohol is actually a depressant, and you can become more depressed on the alcohol. Thirdly, of course, it makes you behave in quite an erratic manner if you're not careful. It takes the balance, you know, out of your decision making. And what is known, for example, is that many people who die by suicide, actually 33 to 50% of them have actually been drinking. If they weren't drinking, they might not have died by suicide. You understand me? So alcohol in connection with mental health difficulties is a problem. Obviously, smoking and addiction problems to drugs, as well as sleep and depression disorders are there. There's a lower rate of anxiety in married people, and it's twice as common in women as men. Now I just want to look a little bit at trying to help you understand how anxiety affects us. And there are three main areas here. First of all, I want to look at how anxiety affects our minds. Secondly, to look at how anxiety affects our bodies. And thirdly, to look at how anxiety can affect our relationships. Okay, so first of all, starting with our minds. Well, we may become hyper alert or apprehensive. Secondly, we can become worried and anxious. Thirdly, we might be having panic attacks. Fourthly, we may be unable to face situations. And many people who are anxious find it very difficult to face anxiety-provoking situations, and they tend to withdraw. And many patients I would have had with anxiety problems have become withdrawn from life because they can't face certain situations. And they often spend a lot of time on their own. And sometimes when they get agoraphobia as well, which is quite common, they sometimes don't go out at all. And we've had people staying indoors for years on end. And that's tragic, really, because they're just not engaged with life. So sometimes when that happens, you can see that they're just not able to face situations because of the anxiety. Of course, phobias are there as well. Anxiety is a part of phobias, and that might be a phobia of flying, a phobia of spiders, a phobia of open spaces, or agoraphobia. And so those are ways in which the mind is affected. There's often poor concentration. And that's a factor because I used to do a memory clinic, and in my memory clinic, obviously a lot of people were concerned about the possibility they might have dementia. But I would find I would get quite a lot of people coming along who are highly performing kind of executive types in their mid-50s. And they were very concerned about their memory and said, "Doctor, I can't remember anything." But actually, when you looked at it carefully and you did all the tests, there was no evidence of dementia, but what they had was often quite severe anxiety. And when you have severe anxiety, you don't actually absorb information properly. You probably notice that yourself. If you're stressed or anxious, you don't absorb things properly. And therefore you think your memory is not working. It's because you're not taking in that information properly. So lack of concentration is a factor. People can be tearful with feelings of exhaustion we've mentioned. Sometimes depression can kick in. People can be irritable or quick to anger and feeling unreal. And that unreality can be of two kinds. Sometimes people feel that they themselves have changed in some way because of the effects of the anxiety in the body. They feel different. Sometimes it can be they feel the environment has changed. And that's called either depersonalization, where it's affecting you, or the environment derealization. It's quite uncomfortable. I had it once, okay? I had it once when I was facing my medical finals, and I had a lot of problems on my mind at the time. And I remember in this lecture suddenly feeling that everything around me had changed. And it was quite an unusual experience. And it's the only time I've ever had it. But that was derealization. That can happen. Of course, anxiety can affect our bodies. And we can struggle with, obviously, many things you'll be aware of. Headaches, dry mouth before you're going for an interview, or you're giving a talk. You can have a dry mouth, as I have now, but I've actually got a cold, so it's not totally anxiety. So dry mouth and sleep disturbance, obviously. People with anxiety typically struggle to get off to sleep, but often their sleep is very broken. Shortness of breath, hyperventilation. They're not always aware of that, but they're breathing more rapidly sometimes and hyperventilating. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Sensitivity to noise. I sometimes say I can tell who's anxious if I creep up behind them and drop a loud pan behind them, a loud frying pan, and see how high they jump. If they're very anxious, they will react to that. Sensitivity to noise is one of those factors. Palpitations, feeling your heart beating, tiredness, weariness, pains or tightness in the chest can be a factor. My wife is also a medical doctor, and she tells this story of how in the casualty department in the Belfast hospital, there was once a man who came into the casualty department and he was doing this. Now, you know why you do that? You're trying to resuscitate yourself, you see. That's what the doctors do. They press on the chest in resuscitation. And what had happened to him was had a lot of chest pain, okay? So he thought he was having a heart attack, okay? So he thought rather than giving the doctors a job, he'd start resuscitating himself on the way into the department. And that's what he was doing. Of course, it wasn't a heart attack, it was a panic attack. And people with panic attacks can get quite severe chest pain. So lump in the stomach and that kind of thing. And then other things can happen: giddiness, unsteadiness, fainting, sweating, pins and needles, cold, clammy hands, difficulty swallowing, nausea or diarrhea, irritable bowel, increased frequency of passing urine, and ringing in the ears, tinnitus. All of those things can be related to anxiety. Of course, you cannot say that if you have one of those features, it is anxiety causing it. Don't make that mistake, because it could be something else, but anxiety can cause all of those things in the body. And then, how does it affect our relationships? Well, most people who suffer from severe anxiety will do one of two things. They will either withdraw, or they will start blaming everybody else and taking it out on everybody else, losing it, becoming angry, upset, and maybe even physically disturbed. So you react in one of those ways usually, depending on your kind of personality. And so you can imagine that in that sense you can easily lose your friends or lose your relationships if that's your usual pattern of behavior. So those are some of the ways in which anxiety can affect us. Now, I mentioned breathing. This is something that's helpful to understand. Obviously, from a little bit of biology, you know that you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out carbon dioxide, okay? Most people will be aware of that. And if you breathe rapidly, then actually what happens to you is the level of oxygen in your bloodstream stays the same, but your level of carbon dioxide goes down. And when that happens, there are small arteries in the brain called arterioles, and in response to low levels of carbon dioxide, they constrict. And you feel faint, or you feel dizzy, or you might actually faint. Of course, when you faint, you stop breathing for a few seconds, and that rights the balance. And then you wake up and say, what happened? Okay? Now, of course, if you have a panic attack, then actually that is made worse. And people with panic attacks have these feelings of shortness of breath, feelings of smothering or choking, palpitations, chest pains, dizziness, unsteadiness, feelings of unreality quite commonly, numbness and tingling, flushing or chills, trembling or shaking, and also a fear of dying sometimes, and a fear of going crazy or doing something uncontrolled. And people who are prone to panic attacks, often because of those, tend to avoid situations that might bring them on. For example, if someone's had one in a supermarket, they'll say, I'm never going to visit that place again. Or someone's had one in another situation, I'm not going back there again. So it affects your lifestyle. Now, I like at this point to have a little bit of audience participation. All right, so I'm going to ask you to participate with me in doing a little experiment. And the experiment I'm going to ask you to do is this, is I want you to breathe in and out as fast as you can over the next half minute. Don't do it if you've got a serious condition, but if you're basically all right, just breathe in and out as fast as you can. Go, do that for half a minute. Big breaths in and out, half a minute. Keep it going. I can see you're getting a bit worn out. Okay. How did you feel? Worn out. Who said dizzy? Dizzy, yeah. Anyone else dizzy, yeah? Anything else? What? Warm, okay. Anything else? Lightheaded, yes. Weak, yes. Okay. what that has just shown you is that actually a lot of the features of a panic attack or anxiety can be brought on by breathing too rapidly. Agreed? Agreed, okay. And actually that's what somebody is experiencing when they're in that state. And that's why they feel dizzy, unsteady, and unable to cope. Which of course leads you on to the fact that actually if you can help someone control their breathing, that can be simply very beneficial. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Okay, I'm now going to just talk a little bit about managing stress. Okay, and most people find this to a degree helpful. Okay. The first thing is that acknowledge that most of us will be going through stressful periods. We may not be stressed all the time, but we will have stressful periods. And some people will be stressed all the time. And sometimes just simply writing things down is enormously helpful. If you don't remember anything else, just remember writing things down. Why? Because when you're anxious and stressed, what tends to happen is thoughts go round and round and round in your mind. And you are part of that, you're kind of aware things are going round and round because you're anxious about them. When you commit those thoughts to paper, it can be extremely helpful in getting you to look at what are the issues that are making you feel stressed and anxious. So doing a stress diary, for example, is very valuable. And in that diary, on a daily basis, putting down the things that are causing you stress. And some of those you may be aware of, but as you write them down, other things come to the fore that you hadn't realized. So you might say, I'm stressed and anxious because I've got all these things to do. I'm stressed and anxious because actually there's a relationship that is causing me a lot of tension and pressure. I'm actually stressed because actually there's some habit or problem I'm grappling with, or I'm stressed because of something that's happened to me in the past that is still on my mind a lot. So you can imagine there are different things there. And as you look at that stress, you can sometimes get at the root of it. I'm not saying you can always do that, but very often you can. Of course, it's easy to blame other people. That's the blame game. We're all into it. It's their fault I am so stressed, okay? Or it's very easy to blame circumstances. I've got far too much to do. That's the source of the problem. But actually, if you're going to deal with stress effectively, the first thing to do is to take responsibility for it. Now, I'm not saying those things cannot be true as well, but when you begin to take responsibility for the stress in your life and say, how much of this is to do with myself and how I'm dealing with life, that can be a very helpful start. Of course, there are unhelpful ways of dealing with stress that we all know. Smoking, drinking, taking medication to calm your nerves, and using pills or drugs, collapsing for hours in front of TV or computer, over or under eating, procrastinating, putting something off all the time. Here's one. Trying to fill up every minute of the day so you don't have to think about difficult areas. Some people do that. Okay, withdrawing from people or taking it out on others, we've already mentioned. Those are unhelpful ways of dealing with stress. What about some more helpful ways? Well, first of all, sometimes with stress it's wiser to avoid it, okay? I can remember at work being asked to take on some extra responsibility. And as I thought about that over a weekend, I decided in the end it would not be a good idea to take on that responsibility. And I did have a genuine choice in the matter. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do that, because if I do that, I will be too stressed. And I know my limits, and I know I can't do that effectively. So learning to avoid things and learn to say no is an important message. Secondly, sometimes we may need to deal with situations and alter the way we're responding. So, for example, some people are struggling with difficult relationships, and they feel under tremendous pressure from another person, but they never actually get round to talking about it. Now, if it's your boss at work, don't go on a Monday morning and say, this doctor was on Saturday night and he told me to come and tell you what's wrong with you, you know. I mean, that won't get you very far, and I don't want you losing your job. However, you know, in many situations, there can be situations of pressure due to another person, sometimes to try and work out what is going on, to try and sit down with that person and maybe work on, is there some better way we can work on this, some better way to react or whatever. Altering the way, being prepared to alter the way you're reacting, as well as maybe making one or two slight suggestions about their behavior, can be helpful. You've got to be sensitive how you do that, you know. Sometimes a mediator is necessary, but it can be very useful. So that's altering the way we respond. Thirdly, adapting. Sometimes people who are perfectionists have very, very high standards all the time. They have to achieve 100% all the time. Now, if you're a perfectionist, it's more difficult, because if you don't hit the 100%, you feel, well, I haven't quite got there today, all right? And sometimes to learn to have good standards, but not necessarily to feel you've always got to hit the 100%, can be helpful. And there are different ways of adapting to our situation that can be helpful to us. And then finally, of course, we may just need to accept things. You know, if you're trying to pass the driving test, you know, you accept that a degree of stress is involved. You're not going to pass it without feeling stress. It's impossible, because it's a difficult skill to learn. The only thing that's worth avoiding is actually trying to teach your daughters to drive. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's not a good idea. Not a good idea. My last daughter basically threw me out of the car, and that was the end of a good relationship. No, we have repaired it since then, but it is a very tense and difficult experience. Get somebody else to teach your daughters to drive, or your sons, whatever. Okay. Learning simple ways of relaxation can be very valuable. I've been at times in my life extremely busy. Particularly, I'm not quite so busy now as I used to be, but when I first took on a consultant job, I was extremely busy. It was all new and a big change, a big step up when you go up the medical grades to the consultant grade. And I remember, you know, I had an awful lot to do, and I would come home with a list of things that I was concerned about. But I found a good way of dealing with that. I went through that list. Actually, before I got into the house, I went through that list, sometimes in the car, and said, what can I do about this problem? And often there was nothing I could do. It would have to wait till the following day. On the other hand, occasionally I might feel, actually, I will ring the ward on that one just to see if I can give some further advice or something like that. So actually, learning those skills were helpful. And when I found that I'd done that, I could then just relax. And I also found that taking an hour out each day when you're very, very busy can be very helpful. You see, some of us feel we've got to keep going all the time, because there's so much to do. No, find a way to relax that suits you and do something relaxing for 1 hour a day. It's very useful. And I found that as I tend to do that, I found it very helpful when I was in that very busy situation. And of course, there are all kinds of ways of relaxing. You know best what suits you. You know, walking, gardening, you know, having friends around, music. Pets are very relaxing. It's wonderful to see the reaction of a group of old people when you put a dog in the middle. It's amazing, you know. Pets can be very relaxing. Nature, books, comedy. Strengthening your body helps. The stronger you are through physical exercise, actually the better you can cope with stress. Not only does the exercise help to relax you because of endorphins released in the brain, but also the exercise strengthens your body and enables you to deal better with stress. So exercise is very valuable. Okay, time management. This is just an important skill, and there are whole books written on this, so I'm only going to dwell on it very briefly. But essentially, you've got a choice to make. If you're, say, a busy housewife, then you might say to yourself, in the next half hour, I've got to make a meal for the children, collect the children from school, I've got to hoover the house, I've got to do the shopping, and I've got to ring somebody, a good friend. Well, except there's no way you can do that in half an hour if that's all the time you've got. And some people react, say, well, I've got to try and squeeze everything in. And that, of course, makes you just feel very anxious and panicky. Much better to say, I've got half an hour, now what can I effectively do in the half hour I've got? And you might say, well, the priorities here are obviously to get something on for the lunch and to collect the children from school. And the other things will either wait, or they won't get done, or I'll get somebody else to help me with them. So learning to plan your time carefully can be helpful. Making space for interruptions. If you say, I've got half an hour to get to the shops and do this and that, well, maybe just to say, I've got half an hour to get to the shops, because you never know. It could be difficult to park the car. It could be difficult, you may be interrupted by a phone call. So make sure you're planning your time effectively. And that is something to do with time management. Now, there's a lot more skills than that, but learning to manage your time can be very valuable. And many people with anxiety and stress problems don't actually think about how they manage their time, but it's a very useful skill. As I said, breathing techniques are very valuable. Now I just want your participation again, all right? I want you to, when I tell you to start, breathe in slowly through your nose to 1, 2, 3, 4, and breathe out through your mouth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? Try and use your abdominal muscles more than your chest. Okay, you ready to start? I'm just going to start you off. Okay, breathe in through your nose, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out through your mouth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Keep it going, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nice and slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Keep it going nice and slowly. Try and use your abdomen more than your chest. Keep it going. In slowly, out. In slowly, out. Okay. Now, I know we've only done that for a very short period of time, but how do you feel? How do you feel? Slows your body down. Anything else? Tired or relaxed? A lot of people say they feel relaxed or going to sleep, but I don't see anybody going to sleep just yet. All right, well, that's fine. You're all awake and alert. This is great. So yeah, I mean, teaching someone to do that can be extremely valuable, because imagine you're somebody who's prone to severe panic, okay? And you get panicked in a supermarket. If before you go into that supermarket you can sit down, slow your breathing down, and bring yourself into a state of relaxation, then you can go in there and find that you can cope. Okay, so learning breathing techniques can be very, very valuable. Problem-solving techniques, we've mentioned this a little bit, writing things down, examining the problem, facing the problem, not trying to put it aside, facing the difficulties can be very valuable. And if nothing can be done, leaving the problem and dealing with interpersonal problems and making sure that they don't hang around in your life. Try and cope with them and deal with them if you possibly can. CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, is very valuable, and there are lots of different things that can be applied to in a variety of mental health disorders. What often people find is that there's a key thought that is driving them, and that thought is sometimes incorrect. For example, could I ask you to volunteer for me for a minute? Could you come here? Okay, just a second. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're my secretary at work, you see, okay? And I come in the morning and I greet you and I say, hi, and all you do is just look at the floor. That's all I'm asking you to do. Hi! Oh dear. Good morning! Oh no. I've upset her. She's annoyed with me. She probably thinks I'm a very poor doctor. Maybe I am. Maybe I should go and do something else in my life. Maybe I'll hand in my resignation. You see what I've done, of course. I've assumed, because of her reaction, that I have the problem. What should I have done? Asked her what the problem was. And you might have said, I've got a rotten headache, I didn't see you, I've been up all night with the kids, something else could happen. The same, applying that to anxiety in slightly different ways. People say, I cannot possibly go into that shop. I cannot possibly go into that situation. And by going with them into that situation on a gradual basis, you find actually that thought is incorrect. You can examine that thought and you can help them with their behavior. Okay. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into that in more detail. Okay? Medication for anxiety? Yes and no. All right. Yes and no. Ideally with anxiety and with stress, you want to try and help people with the simple techniques, with the psychological techniques before you get onto the medicines, okay? However, in certain situations, medication can be valuable. Antidepressants which are sometimes SSRIs, specific serotonin reuptake inhibitors, can be valuable in anxiety, taking the edge off the anxiety. Drugs like diazepam are not recommended for long-term use. However, when somebody is severely anxious, for a very short period of time, a short course can be valuable. These days we find that many people have been on benzodiazepines like diazepam for many years, and sometimes you find that taking them off them causes more problems than actually leaving them on them. And sometimes I've left people on them because I know that if I try and take that person off them, we've tried it before, they get so much worse, it's not worth the effort. And it's not an addiction that's necessarily going to kill you, but it's not, you have to accept that some people are addicted to them because of the way they've been used in the past. It's not ideal. Ideally, short courses. Sometimes you can give them, you can say to the person, if you're facing something that's going to make you extremely anxious, maybe take one or something before you face that anxiety-provoking situation. Okay, that's a little bit on medication. Sometimes when I've had somebody in hospital with very severe anxiety, yes, of course, a benzodiazepine Valium for a couple of weeks can be necessary to break that very severe anxiety. Okay. Now, one or two of you are going to tell me off in a few minutes, and I'll tell you why. But there are some further resources, okay, that you can use that are helpful sources of information, and I'll come back to that. And I do this talk in two parts, okay? There's a reason for that. In this first part, I've been dealing with the medical, psychiatric, psychological aspects of anxiety, giving some practical and useful points, okay? In a few minutes, we're going to have some questions, and then we're going to have a tea break. And the reason for that break is this. I would like you very much to stay for the second part, when I will talk about some spiritual issues as well. But I don't want you to feel that you have to stay for that if you don't want to. I want you to give you the freedom to leave, which is why I have a break. And I will be dealing in that second section with those issues from a Christian perspective. So I'm in a church, you might expect that. But I don't want you to feel that you have to stay for that, which is why I have a break in the middle. But Patricia Casey is a psychiatrist from Dublin, pretty well known, and she's done quite a lot of work connecting together mental health and religious practice. Note, she doesn't say religious belief, but religious practice. And what she's found is that those who regularly practice their religious faith actually have less depression, less suicide, they tend to live longer, their marriages hold together better, they cope better with bereavement, and also young people do better in terms of less drug, alcohol, early sexual experience, etc., and problems in that area. It's interesting that that is shown to be true. And there are other reports that other people investigated that similar situation, also found that to be true. And I will refer to that a little bit in the second part. And now I just want to see if there are questions that you